Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mr. Aleister Crowley. This is Liber 4. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Liber 4 with Part 2, Chapter 8, The Sword. The word of the Lord is quick and powerful and sharper than a two-edged sword. As the wand is Kokma, the will, the father, and the cup the understanding, the mother, Bina, so the magic sword is the reason, the sun, the sixth Sephiroth of the Ruach, and we shall see that the pentacle corresponds to Malkuth, the daughter. The magic sword is an analytical faculty. Directed against any demon, it attacks his complexity. Only the simple can withstand the sword. As we are below the abyss, this weapon is then entirely destructive. It divides Satan against Satan. It is important to remember that Satan is a concept and not actually an entity, right? Not in the way that it is described in the New Testament, at least, right? There is no direct oppositional creative force to the creator of all things, right? If there is a Satan, he was created by the creator. He is not equal to the creator. And so it is important to maintain that understanding as we go into any of this. There is no supreme being called Satan, right? That's just simply not a thing. Lucifer was merely the light bringer, bringing some intelligence. Satan is a little bit different of a connotation, but it's basically the same thing. The opposition to the intrinsically good, and that is a concept, but it's not necessarily the entity that is described. And that is, again, vitally important to remember, right? According to the Old Testament, there is no hell. There is nobody in charge of hell. There is no eternal condemnation for sin. Those are important things to remember. All right. It is only in the lower forms of magic, the purely human forms, that the sword has become so important a weapon. A dagger should be sufficient. But the mind of man is normally so important to him that the sword is actually the largest of his weapons. Happy is he who can make the dagger suffice. Now remember we talked about the dagger, right? That is so directing the will through the chakras, right? That's what I call them. That's where the term I was introduced. There's energy centers located within your spinal column mostly, right? There's one outside of the spinal column entirely, or two really, because of the divine. But there are these 6 points along the chakra, and that is what's described. They miss one of the internal ones, and that's okay. But if all of your chakras are aligned correctly, they are the sword of discernment. They are the sword of manifestation. They are the sword that divides this from that, right? It is quite literally the will, understanding. And so this is the sword. It is not an external thing. I have a couple of them in the closet right here. I could pull them out, but I'm not going to. Right? It is not a physical sword. It is the mental sword of discernment. Keep that in mind as we get into him describing this tool that is most definitely not the internal sword of discernment. The hilt of the sword should be made of copper. The guard is composed of the two crescents of the waxing and waning moon, back to back. Spheres are placed between them, forming an equilateral triangle with the sphere of the pommel. The blade is straight, pointed, and sharp, right up to the guard. It is made of steel to equilibrate with the hilt, for steel is the metal of Mars and copper is of Venus. Those two planets are male and female, way to anthropomorphize yet something else, and thus reflect the wine in the cup, though in a much lower sense. The hilt is of Venus, for love is the motive of this ruthless analysis. If this were not so, the sword would be a black magical weapon. It is probably so regardless. The pommel of the sword is in the da'ath. The guard extends to Kaset and Gabura. The point is in Malkuth. Some Magi make the three spheres of lead, tin, and gold, respectively. The moons are silver, and the grip contains quicksilver, thus making the sword symbolic of the 7 planets. Quicksilver is Mercury, and you are fixating Mercury within the grip, and that is wrapped around the hilt, I guess. Right now, the grip and the hilt are pretty close to the same thing. The hilt is the actual physical part, and the grip is wrapped around it. Right, it is normally cordage of some type. I like to use paracord because it is so useful in other situations. But there is a grip wrapped around. I do not understand how that can be quicksilver in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, thus making the sword symbolic of the 7 planets. And it is important to remember that there are 8 planets. But this is a fantasy and affectation. Whoso taketh the sword shall perish by the sword. And that is not the quote. He who liveth by the sword shall perish by the sword. Is not a mystical threat, but a mystical promise, and that is true. It is our own complexity that must be destroyed. Right, now this right here, he whoso taketh the sword shall perish by the sword, that is he who lives by, right, that is the actual quote. This is true, not just for the sword, right? This is the heart of manifestation. That which you focus on is that which you will receive. You receive that which you plant. You harvest the crops that you put in the ground. And so if you are planting swords, you receive swords. If you're planting bitterness, you receive bitterness. If you're planting jealousy, you receive jealousy. If you are planting love, you receive love. If you're planting kindness, you receive kindness. This is a very large analogy. It is not just a sword. It is quite literally the entirety. And if you remember that the sword is internal, it is another warning. Here's another parable. Peter, the stone of the philosophers, cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. We will be dealing, and if you are unaware, we're talking with Jason from Green Country Agroforestry. I'm not sure when this video is going up. I'm not sure if it's going to be Saturday or Sunday. So if it's Saturday, then today we will be doing a live stream at noon Central Time. If it is Sunday, it'll be next week. Hopefully at the same time. I will be letting you know. But we are exploring the Hebrew alphabet, and in the process, we are learning that the word Cephas, that was used for Peter, interpreted into Peter, was not necessarily what they were talking about when they were talking about the stone being the bread of life and the cornerstone upon which things are built. And we are exploring those concepts in the live stream. So if you're interested, you should definitely dig in and join us. Peter, the stone of the philosophers, cuts off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. The ear is the organ of the spirit. That is up for argument. In analysis, the spiritual part of Malkuth must be separated from it by the philosophical stone, and then Christus, the anointed one, makes it whole once more. Solve et coagula. Something about blood. Right now, this was not given as a parable, but you can definitely take it as a parable, right? The story of what happened in the garden. Pretty much the entirety of the New Testament is a parable, not a history. That is something that is going to be a little bit contentious for people, but if you are unaware, then you should definitely tune into the live stream or fall back and check out my Bible study where we talk about these things. But there is no real reason to take the Bible as literal history. It contains some historical facts. It contains some outright blatant lies about history. And so there is a lot to take with salt in that particular book. But using it as an analogy is quite effective for a variety of things. And using Peter as the stone of the philosophers is going to be a stretch, right? That is the cornerstone upon which it is built, and that is not even a correct quote. And so, yeah. It is noticeable that this takes place at the arrest of Christ, who is the Son, the Ruach, immediately before his crucifixion. The Calvary cross should be of 6 squares, an unfolded cube, which cube is the same philosophical stone. Meditation will reveal many mysteries which are concealed in this symbol. The sword or dagger is attributed to air, all wandering, all penetrating, but unstable. Not a phenomenon, subtle like fire, not a chemical composition like water, but a mixture of gases. Footnote: the oxygen in the air would be too fierce for life. It must be largely diluted with the inert nitrogen. We do have a upper limit for oxygen. It is around 22%. After that, it becomes a little bit detrimental. That is a true thing. We operate around 18% in the atmosphere. That is a true thing. And so this footnote is mostly true. Right? Too fierce for life. I am under the assumption, like if you are unaware, there are many different theories about the history of the planet, right? And one of those theories is that there was at one point in time what is called the vapor canopy. The vapor canopy is something that there is definite reason to believe that might have been a thing. The outflow of the hypotheses of the vapor canopy is that there was a heavy humidity dome over the planet. We didn't have the free-falling water like we do now. But there was this really intense humidity dome, the water vapor canopy, that the sunlight was diffused in a much greater fashion than it is now, and those things are something that can be argued. But as part of that, what is probable is that the concentration of oxygen was higher, and by being higher, it actually allowed us to grow to greater stature. Now, by us, I mean life in general, not necessarily humanity, although there is the argument to be made for the giants. Right? There is significant reason to believe that there were giants at least some point in time. Now, what religious significance there is to that is entirely up for debate, but there is significant reason to believe that there have been giants, right? And we still have outshoots of that, people that grow 7-8 feet tall. That is definitely an aberration. And if most of humanity was 5 foot or less, which was definitely a thing during certain periods of time, then somebody who reached 8 foot is almost twice as high as you. They would look like a giant, right? That doesn't mean that they were 15 foot tall, but that is a possibility as well. And so I do not rule any of those out. The vapor canopy and the compression of the oxygen is something that actually lends into that. If the oxygen is higher, then it allows greater growth. And that's not just us, right? That's the sequoias and things like that too. So, back to the text. The rational mind supports life, but about 79%. About 79% of it not only refuses itself to enter into combination, but prevents the remaining 21% from doing so. Enthusiasms are checked. The intellect is the great enemy of devotion. One of the tasks of the magician is to manage somehow to separate the oxygen and nitrogen in his mind, to stifle 4/5 so that he may burn up the remainder, a flame of holiness, but this cannot be done by the sword. Okay, this is just whatever. Right, I'm not even going to dive into that. Right, the distribution of oxygen in the atmosphere has very little to do with manifestation efforts. It does with growth, less with manifestation. The sword, necessary as it is to the beginner, is but a crude weapon. Its function is to keep off the enemy or to force a passage through them. And though it must be wielded to gain admission to the palace, it cannot be worn at the marriage feast. Says who? There's a whole part of the Bible study where we talked about the marriage feast. You should check that out. One might say that the pentacle is the bread of life and the sword, the knife which cuts it up. One must have ideas, but one must criticize them. That is true. Always be correctable. And in most especially, seek to correct yourself, right? Criticize your own efforts. The sword, too, is that weapon with which one strikes terror into the demons and dominates them. One must keep the ego lord of the impressions. One must not allow the circle to be broken by the demon. One must not allow any one idea to carry one away. It will be readily seen how very elementary and false all this is, but for the beginner, it is necessary. Now, I have told you repeatedly that the tools are not necessary. They can be needed, right? Now, if you are in the learning process, tools can be especially handy because they are reminders of what you are to do, right? The various things that are carved are to remind you. They are not intrinsically power in themselves. The various implements are to remind you. They don't hold any power of themselves. You can invest power in them, but they do not hold any power. And so if you have an altar, the altar is to remind you of something. If you have something on the altar, that something is to remind you of something. It is not for the altar or the thing itself. In all dealings with demons, the point of the sword is kept downward and it should not be used for invocation as is taught in certain schools of magic. I am going to tell you now that you probably do not want to be dealing with demons. There are entities that are aligned for the betterment of humanity and entities that are aligned for the detriment of humanity. The ones that are aligned for the detriment of humanity we call demons, and they can lie. They can tell you that they are not demons. They can convince you that they serve the other side. That is part of what they do. And so you can be deceived when dealing with entities. And that is why I maintain that it is not a good idea to deal with entities. Right? Nothing that I have done, nothing that I have put into this book requires you seeking out any entity whatsoever. If the sword is raised towards the crown, it is no longer really a sword. The crown cannot be divided. Certainly, the sword should not be lifted. The sword may, however, be clasped in both hands and kept steady and erect, symbolizing the thought has become one with this single aspiration and burnt up like a flame. This flame is the Shin, the Ruach Alhim, not the mere Ruach Adam. The divine is not the human consciousness. The magician cannot wield the sword unless the crown is on his head. Those magicians who have attempted to make the sword the sole or even the principal weapon have only destroyed themselves, not by the destruction of the combination, but by the destruction of division. Yeah. Footnote. It should be noted that this ambiguity in the word destruction has been the cause of much misunderstanding. Solve is destruction, but so is coagula. The aim of the magus is to destroy his partial thought by uniting it with the universal thought, not to make a further breach and division in the whole. Weakness overcomes strength. Yeah, I don't know about that. The most stable political edifice of history has been that of China. We'll talk about that real quick, which was founded principally on politeness, and that of India has proved strong enough to absorb its many conquerors. Footnote, the Brahmin caste is not so strict as that of the heaven-born Indian civil service. All right, let's talk about this one. This is one of the great lies of the world, right? There has indeed been this collective entity referred to kind of as China for millennia. But it has not been a stable political edifice for most of that history. There was great dissension within. There have been periods where it was stable, and there have been periods where there was turmoil, almost as though there were humans involved. There have been many different governmental systems in place, although they called them the same thing in several instances, right? This emperor was completely different than this other emperor in everything, right? The way that the kingdom was ruled, the way that it was organized, the people that were employed, the offices that they held. Everything was different. There was a rough structure of this one guy in charge and some of these other people being appointed under him, but that is literally all of humanity. And if you are going to attribute to them political stability just because there was this emperor over the course of time, then fine, but that is severely neglecting history in very remarkable ways. This is also one of the things that people still say today, which is entirely fucking retarded. And there is no point of China today that was around 150 years ago. Not a single part of it is even remotely identical. And I only go that far back because I'm not entirely sure when the Great Leap Forward was, and they killed all of those people trying to enact communism, which they failed miserably in, and had to resort to fascism instead. And so, yes, China is a fascist country. They are not communist. I don't know if you know that or not. If you don't, you should definitely check out some of my other videos where we discuss those things. China has not had a stable government. It does not have a stable government now. It has a dictator, and there is contention within the ranks. There has been severe overturning, at least in the last 150 years. Right? And again, that is a very long estimate. I'm pretty sure it's closer to 70. And so this is one of the great lies, right? There is no firm, stable political edifice of history over thousands of years in China. It is just simply not a thing. It is not a thing anywhere, right? I'm not singling them out, but this is the argument that is still made today. They still make this argument today. China's had a government that's been the same country for 2,000 years. No, it absolutely has not. Absolutely has not and is not right now. Right? It's changed within my lifetime from the attempt at communism into the fascism that it is. All right. The sword has been the great weapon of the last century. Every idea has been attacked by thinkers, and none has withstood the attack. Hence, civilization crumbles. No settled principles remain. Today, all constructive statesmanship is empiricism or opportunism. It has been doubted whether there is any real relation between mother and child, any real distinction between male and female. And that is still a rather stupid debate that is going on today. Yes, there is a difference between male and female. That is unequivocal. You may be confused. Your body is not. Right? If you believe that you were born in the wrong body, you are wrong. Your body is not. And I know, I step on toes. I don't care. And it's not intentional. I do not apologize. And if you are under the delusion that you were born in the wrong body, you are under a delusion. The human mind, in despair, seeing insanity imminent in the breaking up of these coherent images, has tried to replace them by ideals which are only safe from destruction at the very moment of their birth, by their vagueness. The will of the king was at least ascertainable at any moment. Nobody has yet devised a means for ascertaining the will of the people. We have this thing now called the internet. All conscious willed action is impeded. The march of events is now nothing but inertia. Let the magician consider these matters before he takes the sword in his hand. Let him understand that the Ruach, this loose combination of 6 Sephiroth, only bound together by their attachment to the human will in Tippereth, must be rent asunder. The mind must be broken up into a form of insanity before it can be transcended. David said, I hate thoughts. He probably hated the ones he had. The Hindu says, that which can be thought is not true. That's stupid. Paul said, the carnal mind is enmity against God. That is only partly true. Right? And once again, Paul is not really anyone to listen to. And everyone who meditates, even for an hour, will soon discover how this gusty, aimless wind makes his flame flicker. The wind bloweth where it listeth. The normal man is less than a straw. Footnote. But, as is said, similia similibus curantur. We find this Ruach also the symbol of the Spirit. Ruvakalim. The Spirit of God is 300, the number of the holy letter Shin. As this is the breath, which by its nature is double, the 2 edges of the sword, the letter H, symbolizes breath, and H is the letter of Aries, the house of Mars of the sword, and H is also the letter of the mother. This is the link between the sword and the cup. That is not a link, that is some words that you threw together, right? If you're doing numbers, you're doing it wrong. If you're doing complicated mathematics, you are not doing it correctly. And there is no reason for H to be the letter of Aries in English, right? It might be in Greek, but who knows, right? I don't. I don't know Greek, so I can't speak to that, but it's not in English where you have it translated into English and so there is several problems. The connection between breath and mind has been supposed by some to exist merely in etymology, but the connection is a truer one. There is definitely a connection between your breath and the mind. Footnote. It is undoubted that Ruach means primarily that which moves or revolves, a going, a wheel, the wind. and that its secondary meaning was mind because of the observed instability of the mind and its tendency to a circular motion. Spiritus only came to mean spirit in the modern technical sense owing to the efforts of the theologians. We have an example of the proper use of the word in the term spirit of wine, the airy portion of wine. But the word inspire was perhaps derived from observing the derangement of the breathing of persons in divine ecstasy. Why? No. In any case, there is undoubtedly a connection between the respiratory and mental functions. The student will find this out by practicing pranayama. By this exercise, some thoughts are barred, and those which do come into the mind come more slowly than before, so that the mind has time to perceive their falsity and to destroy them. On the blade of the magic sword is etched the name Agla, a Natokoyan formed from the initials of the sentence, Ategabor Leolham Adonai, to thee be the power into the ages, O my Lord. And the acid which eats into the seed steel should be the oil of vitriol. Vitriol is a notucrion of vista interior terrae, rectificandio intervenis occultum lapidum, that is to say, by investigating everything and bringing it into harmony and proportion, you will find the hidden stone, and the same stone of the philosophers, of which mention has already been made, which turns all into gold. This oil, which can eat into the steel, is further written, that which is written, Liber, as an acid eats into steel, so am I unto the spirit of man. There are many acids that can eat into steel, right? Just for an example, vinegar. Right, apple cider vinegar can etch steel. If you take fingernail polish and you paint the blade of a knife and then you scrape away an etching that you would like to have in it and you stick it into some apple cider vinegar for a few hours. Acid cider is rather a weak acid, but it'll etch it. Like, it'll take the design and etch it into the metal. So there are various, it doesn't have to be any one particular one. You should be extremely careful before using any of the acids. They can be dangerous. Note how closely woven into itself is all of this symbolism. The center of the Ruach being the heart, it is seen that this sword of the Ruach must be thrust by the magician into his own heart, or it can be wielded by the heart. The heart is the key to the manifestation process. There are 3 points below the heart, there are 3 points above the heart, and then there's 1 point outside of the heart, but the heart is the center. The base, the sacral and the solar plexus, which is the butthole, the reproductive areas in the stomach, right? Those are the as below trinity. The crown, the third eye, and the throat are the as above trinity. And if you bring the as below trinity into accordance with the as above trinity, through the heart, you wield the sword of creation. The center is the heart. That is a true thing. Without the heart being in alignment, there is no manifestation. That is a true thing. You must use the sword with your heart, not thrust it into it. But there is a subsequent task, of which it is spoken in Liber 7, verse 47. He shall await the sword of the beloved, and bear his throat for the stroke. In the throat is Da'ath, the throne of Ruach. Da'ath is knowledge. The final destruction of knowledge opens the gate of the city of pyramids. The throat and the solar plexus, right? These are amplification devices. The third eye and the sacral are directional, and the crown and the base are observational. They come to the realization, which gets directed by the other two and then amplified by the throat and the solar plexus. The amplification comes by the things you consume, right? The things that you consume become you. That is amplifying your efforts. And the things which you speak aloud, which is your throat. In addition to that, where does knowledge come from? Knowledge comes from communication, whether that is communication with the world and experimentation or through communication with other people. And if it is through communication with other people, then that is going to be through the throat, right? You hear through the ears, but those are kind of tied to the same thing. And so I'm unclear on which particular chakra governs the ears. I think it might actually be the throat. I haven't done the experimentation to check, right? I did with the hands, I did with the feet, and a couple of the other ones, but I haven't done it with the throat yet, or with the ears. Maybe I need to check that out, but I think that they're related to the throat as well, and so it is consuming things, right? As opposed to discerning, which would be the third eye. All of that to say that, yes, wisdom does rely upon the throat. Yes, it is how you amplify your intentions. When you speak something aloud, you are literally creating it. It is also written in Liber 223:11, "Let the woman be girt with a sword before me." But this refers to the arming of Vedana with Sana and the overcoming of emotion by clarity of perception. It is also spoken in Liber 35:5-14 of the sword of Adonai, that hath four blades, the blade of the thunderbolt, the blade of the pylon, the blade of the serpent, and the blade of the phallus. I am going to go out on a limb, right? I have not read through all of the Libers. This is the first one that we are doing. There are many really oddly numbered books. I'm going to go out on a ledge and say that don't pay any attention to most of the things that are quoted. Right? Mr. Crowley had no real understanding of what he is doing, and all of the Libers are his efforts, and we have seen already in this study that he does not really have the conception on how to do the things that he is talking about. And so when he quotes himself as he is doing, you can pretty much dismiss it. But this sword is not for the ordinary magician. For this is the sword flaming every way that keeps Eden. And in this sword the wand and the cups are concealed, so that although the being of the magician is blasted by the thunderbolt and poisoned by the serpent, at the same time the organs whose union is the supreme sacrament are left in him. At the coming of Adonai, the individual is destroyed in both senses. He is shattered into 1,000 pieces, yet at the same time united with the simple. You know what? Let's go ahead and do this. Right? The sword flaming that keeps Eden. Now, there is two ways to take this story. Now, I did the Genesis story when we did the Bible study, and we looked at that as though it were true, right? And if it were true, and they were kicked out of the garden by this flaming demon. I see that as an allegory, not necessarily as a literal, and if so, then what happened was. I believe that there is a cycle of destruction that happens on this planet. I have historical reasons which are outlined in the Ancient Lore playlist in Timaeus and Critias by the works of Plato, and in the 12,000 year disaster cycle where we outline it using some modern day scholars. There is a cycle that repeats. One is hot, one is wet. The last one was a wet one. We remember it as the flood. There are a great variety of stories attached to that particular event, and it's not all Noah. But outside of that, we also have these creation stories of this expelling. In the hot event, which would have been the one preceding the wet event, 12,000 years ago as opposed to 6,000 years ago, there was a great plasmic discharge, and that is like a lightning bolt, but it is not like a terrestrial lightning bolt. Instead, it is a lightning bolt 50 miles wide, 100 miles wide. Enormous bolt of electricity coming down and energizing the planet, causing all kinds of problems, rearranging things, and making it look a lot different. It resembled a sword, and that sword was taking away this garden where these people once lived, and they are instead moved to a new place. I believe that that is the border between India and Pakistan for a variety of reasons, which I detail in the Bible study. You should check it out. And to me, that is going to be the better explanation for this sword. Now, another way of looking at that is getting the understanding, right? If we were a primitive and there was some event that caused our spontaneous evolution, which I do believe is probably the case, we would remember this event and what we did. We went from primitives with no real cognition or understanding of time into the current version of ourselves, which does have that understanding. That would be the removal from Eden, the just wandering purely instinctual existence into one of making choices between this and that, between good and bad, between what we should and what we should not. Right? That would be the expulsion from Eden as well. Either one of those are perfectly fine ways of looking at it. There's nothing we are going to be able to prove about either one of those. But it is definitely not the same as what he says. Okay. Of this, it is also spoken by St. Paul in his epistle to the church at Thessalonica. For the Lord shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the clouds, and meet the Lord in the air. And so we be forever with the Lord. Remember I told you about that cycle? Imagine, if you will, that we are at the point of the hot one coming again, and soon we will see a sign in the sky, and that sign in the sky will give an audible sound along with the visual cue. It will sound a lot like a trumpet. See the 12,000-year disaster cycle? And that will cause great destruction, making many people indeed rise. The stupid interpretation of this verse as a prophetic of a second advent need not concern us. Every word of it is, however, worthy of profound consideration. I know. Remember the problems with prophecy? The problems with prophecy is you can only interpret it according to what you already understand. That is the major problem with prophecy. And so Paul was looking for something, and that is definitely an arguable subject, I understand. Right? Paul was in opposition to everybody that actually studied with Jesus. He was not giving the same message at all. And so you should be very wary, if you are following Christ, of listening to Paul. There is very good reasons to doubt those things. But this second advent, no, right? There is not going to be a second return. There is going to be something, but it's not somebody coming back. The Lord is Adonai, which is the Hebrew for my Lord, and he descends from heaven, the supernal Eden, the Sahasrara Chakara in man, with a shout, a voice, and a trump. Again, airy symbols, for it is air that carries sound. These sounds refer to those heard by the adept at the moment of rapture. Water also carries sound. As a matter of fact, solid vessels carry sound as well. Right? You can run a string between two cups and speak into the cup, and it will be carried as a wavelength along the string, which is a solid thing. The whole mind of man is rent by the advent of Adonai and is at once caught up in union with him in the air, the Ruach. Note that etymologically the word together with is the Sanskrit Sam and the Hebrew Adni, and is the Sanskrit Adhi. That sounds like some shit you made up. Right, it is entirely possible that Hebrew is derived from Sanskrit, and we do not know. There is good reason to believe it might be, but to blend these two together is a problem. The phrase, together with the Lord, is then literally identical with the word samadhi, which is the Sanskrit name of the phenomenon described by St. Paul. This union of the ego and the non-ego, subject and object, this chemical marriage, and thus identical with the symbolism of the rosy cross under a slightly different aspect. And since marriage can only take place between one and one, it is evident that no idea can thus be united unless it is simple. This is definitely up for debate, right? I mean, maybe not so much today, but definitely through the history of time, there have been marriages that definitely consisted of more than one and one, and I mean, you can take him as an example for that. Hence, every idea must be analyzed by the sword. Hence, too, there must be only a single thought in the mind of the person meditating. One may now go on to consider the use of the sword in purifying emotions and perceptions. It was the function of the cup to interpret the perceptions by the tendencies. The sword frees the perceptions from the web of emotion. The perceptions are meaningless in themselves, but the emotions are worse, for they delude the victim into supposing them significant and true. Every emotion is an obsession. The most horrible of blasphemies is to attribute any emotion to God in the macrocosm or to the pure soul in the microcosm. Really, any emotion whatsoever. Happiness? You can't attribute happiness to God? Joy? Fulfillment? Love? You can't attribute those to God? Seriously. All. It's a big word, right? I'm so reticent about using big words because of things like that. How can that which is self-existent, complete, be moved? It is even written that torsion about the point is iniquity. Footnote. See Macrobius, Iamblichus, Plotinus, and sayings attributed to Pythagoras for these views. But if the point itself could be moved, it would cease to be itself, for position is the only attribute of the point. The magician must therefore make himself absolutely free in this respect. It is the constant practice of demons to attempt to terrify, to shock, to disgust, and to allure. Whenever them entities show up and they say, "Be not afraid," it's probably a demon. Against all this, he must oppose the steel of the sword. If he has got rid of the ego idea, this task will be comparatively easy. Unless he has done so, it will be almost impossible. So says the Dhammapada. Me he abused, and me he beat, he robbed me, he insulted me. In whom such thoughts find harborage, hatred will never cease to be. And this hatred is the thought which inhibits the love, whose hypothesis is samadhi. But it is too much to expect the young magician to practice attachment to the distasteful. Let him first become indifferent. Let him endeavor to see facts as facts, and simply as he would see them as if they were historical. Let him avoid the imaginative interpretation of any facts. Let him not put himself in the place of the people of whom the facts are related, or if he does so, let it be done only for the purpose of comprehension. Sympathy, indignation, praise, and blame are out of place in the observer. Footnote, it is true that sometimes sympathy is necessary to comprehension. Sympathy can be a key to unlocking comprehension in its entirety. Sympathy and empathy are closely related. No one has considered the question as to the amount and quality of the light afforded by candles made by waxed Christians. Who has any idea of which joint of the ordinary missionary is preferred by epicures? It is only a matter of conjecture that Catholics are better at eating than Presbyterians. What the fuck is going on here? Yet these points and their kind are the only ones which have any importance at the time when the events occur. Nero did not consider what unborn posterity might think of him. It is difficult to credit cannibals with the calculation that the recital of their exploits will induce pious old ladies to replenish their larder. Very few people have ever seen a bullfight. One set of people goes for excitement, another side for the perverse excitement which real or simulated horror affords. Very few people know that blood freshly spilled in the sunlight is perhaps the most beautiful color that is to be found in nature. Intentions, babe. Intentions. It is a notorious fact that it is practically impossible to get a reliable description of what occurs at a spiritualistic seance. The emotions cloud the vision. Only in the absolute calm of the laboratory, where the observer is perfectly indifferent to what may happen, only concerned to observe exactly what the happening is, to measure and to weigh it by means of instruments incapable of emotion, can one even begin to hope for a truthful record of events. Even the common physical basis of emotion, the senses of pleasure and pain, lead the observer infallibly to err. This, though they be not sufficiently excited to disturb the mind. Plunge one hand into a basin of hot water and the other into a basin of cold water, then to both together into a basin of tepid water. The one will say hot, the other cold. Even in instruments themselves, their physical qualities, such as expansion and contraction, which may be called in a way the roots of pleasure and pain, cause error. Make a thermometer, and the glass is so excited by the necessary fusion that year by year, for 30 years afterwards or more, the height of the mercury will continue to alter. How much more then will with so plastic a matter as the mind? There is no emotion which does not leave a mark on the mind, and all marks are bad marks. Hope and fear are the only opposite phases of a single emotion. Both are incompatible with the purity of the soul. Hope is incompatible with purity of the soul, you say. Really? Hope springs eternal from the divine. Wow. With the passions of man, the case is somewhat different, as they are functions without his own will. They need to be disciplined, not to be suppressed. But emotion is impressed from without. It is an invasion of the circle. As the Dhammapada says, an ill-thatched house is open to the mercy of the rain and wind, so passion hath the power to break again to an unreflecting mind. A well-thatched house is proof against the fury of the rain and wind, so passion hath no power to break into a rightly ordered mind. Let then the student practice observation of those things which normally would cause him emotion, and let him, having written a careful description of what he sees, check it by the aid of some person familiar with such sights. You should observe your emotions. You should have your emotions. You should not deny your emotions. They all have a place, but you should not let your emotions rule you. If you feel anger, it may be valid, it may not. You should be able to use the sort of discernment to figure that out. Surgical operations and dancing girls are fruitful fields for the beginner. In reading emotional books, such as are inflicted on children, let him always endeavor to see the event from the standpoint opposite to that of the author. Yet, let him not emulate the partially emancipated child who complained of a picture of the Colosseum that there was only one poor little lion who hadn't got any Christian, except in the first instance. Adverse criticism is the first step. The second must go further. Having sympathized sufficiently with both the lions and the Christians, let him open his eyes to that which his sympathy has masked hitherto, that the picture is abominably conceived, abominably composed, abominably drawn, and abominably colored, as it is pretty sure to be. Let him further study those masters in science or in art who have observed with minds untinctured by emotion. Let him learn to detect idealizations, to criticize and to correct them. Let him understand the falsehood of Raphael, of Watteau, of Leighton, of Bouguereau. Let him appreciate the truthfulness of John, of Rembrandt, of Titian, of O'Connor. Similar studies in literature and philosophy will lead to similar results, but do not let him neglect the analysis of his own emotions, for until these are overcome, he will be incapable of judging others. The analysis may be carried out in various ways. One is the materialistic way. For example, if oppressed by nightmare, let him explain. This nightmare is a cerebral congestion. The strict way of doing this is by meditation is mahasatipatthana. Footnote, see Crowley Collected Works. But it should be aided in every moment of life by endeavoring to estimate occurrences at their true value. Their relativity in particular must be carefully considered. Your toothache does not hurt anyone outside of a very small circle. Floods in China mean to you nothing but a paragraph in the newspaper. The destruction of the world itself would have no significance in Sirius. One can hardly imagine, even, that astronomers of Sirius would perceive so trifling a disturbance. Now, considering that Sirius itself is only, as far as you know, but one, and one of the least important of the ideas in your mind, why should that mind be disturbed by your toothache? Is it not possible to labor this point without tautology? For it is a very simple one, but it should be emphasized, for it is a very simple one. Wah, 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 wah. It is the question of ethics. It again becomes vital. For many people, it seems impossible to consider the merits of any act without dragging in a number of subjects which have no real connection to it. The Bible has been mistranslated by perfectly competent scholars because they had to consider the current theology. The most glaring example is the Song of Solomon, a typical piece of Oriental eroticism. But since to admit that it was this would never do for a canonical book, they had to pretend that it was symbolical. They tried to refine away the grossness of the expressions, but even their hardihood proved unequal to the task. This form of dishonesty reaches its climax in the expurgating of the classics. The Bible is the Word of God, written by holy men, as they were inspired by the Holy Ghost. But we will cut out those passages which we think unsuitable. Shakespeare is our greatest poet, but of course he is very dreadful. No one can surpass the lyrics of Shelley, but we must pretend that he was not an atheist. Some translators could not bear that the heathen Chinese could use the word Shang-Ti, and pretended that it did not mean God. Others, compelled to admit that it did mean God, explained that the use of the term showed that God had not left himself without a witness even in the most idolatrous of nations. This has been mysteriously compelled to use it, not knowing what it meant. All because of their emotional belief that they were better than the Chinese. The most dazzling example of this is shown in the history of the study of Buddhism. The early scholars simply could not understand that the Buddhist canon denies the soul, regards the ego as a delusion caused by a special faculty of the diseased mind. Could not understand that the goal of the Buddhist, Nibbana, was in any way different from their own goal, heaven, in spite of the perfect plainness of the language in which such dialogues as those between Arahat Nagasena and King Melinda, and their attempt to square the text with their preconceptions will always stand as one of the great follies of the wise. Again, it is almost impossible for the well-mannered Christian to realize that Jesus Christ ate with his fingers. The temperance advocate makes believe that the wine at the marriage feast of Cana was non-alcoholic. It is a sort of mad syllogism. No one whom I respect does this. I respect so-and-so, therefore so-and-so did not do this. The moralist of today is furious when one points to the fact that practically every great man in history was grossly and notoriously immoral. Enough of this painful subject. As long as we try to fit facts to theories instead of adopting the scientific attitude of altering the theories, when necessary, to fit the facts, we shall remain mired in falsehood. The religious taunt their scientific man with this open-mindedness and with this adaptability. Tell a lie and stick to it is their golden rule. There's a diagram that is missing, and that is going to bring us to the end of the sword. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. Using the sword of discernment is important. I have described to you what it is. I have written a book on how to use it. If you wish to do so, it is not that expensive. I had to put a pay gate on it for a reason, but it's really as little as I could probably make it. There are great misunderstandings in this book. We have seen several of them today. We have seen several of them through the course of this study. We will see several more as we continue. I am almost at the point where I would just stop doing these studies because it is so very useless. But these particular studies are going to be useful simply because people refer to Crowley as a master, as someone who actually understood what he was doing, and he did not. He did not have the understanding. He did not have any of the fruits. He did not bear out any witnesses. He is antithetical to the operation of the situation. Everything that he did is exactly wrong. Right? And everything is a big word. I don't really like using big words, but almost, right? Reading through the wiki, it was obvious where this was going to go. Right? This is just as bad as Agrippa was. In a different way, slightly, but really, right? We're not cutting out the eyes of newts and turning them loose because that's good. Right, so I guess this is better than that, but it's still completely full of things that, while they may be a little bit useful, are not necessary to the process at all, and several of them have been intrinsically detrimental to the progress of enlightenment. And if you are looking for the enlightenment, many of the things in here will lead you away from it, not towards it, away from it. And that is the things that we are trying to discern here, right? I have some experience that I am pulling from, right? I am not just talking because I read something in a book somewheres. I wrote the book because I literally affected change in my life. I literally got shown how to heal myself. I asked for healing. I received the ability to do it. And so I'm relaying that. And I have to assume that the method that I used is at least an effective one because it has gotten me there. When something is written and it directly is against what I know to be true, then I have to point it out. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment whether you agree or disagree with anything that was said. Put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.